If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we continue to unravel the mysteries behind the origins, motives, and cultures of the 13 vampiric legacies in the world of darkness. This episode will focus on the prideful warriors of the Ebony Kingdom, the Ossebo. For all the shit I give the Toreador clan, for all the times I mock their shallow natures and pretentious mindsets, it pales in comparison to the frustration I have for the learned clan, the Bruja. They are just incapable of getting anything done by themselves and are not worthy or dedicated enough to rule their destiny, let alone an entire sect. Although, to call the Anarchs a sect is like calling a duck a pig and expecting it to act as such. But I am not stubborn enough to admit that the Bruja do have their uses. Well, use, to be terribly pedantic. If you want something taken care of in a fiery fit of rage, they are the muscle you call upon. They are very good at destroying things, excellent should they allow themselves to frenzy. They could have ascended to greatness if the Ventrue and the Camarilla they birthed could have kept a tighter grip on them, but alas, they gave them the freedom to express themselves, and look at the mess we are all in now. So imagine for a moment that things were different. Imagine that the Camarilla allowed them to let loose and never stop whilst keeping them on a loose leash. Sounds pretty frightening, doesn't it? Well, that sort of relationship does exist, as does that particular breed of Bruja. I don't refer to the Bruja anti-tribu, as they are independent enough not to rely on others. The Ossebo of the Ebony Kingdom forever walks on thin ice to prevent them from frenzying, far more so than any other breed of Western Bruja. But before we unravel what is known as the Ossebo, the African bloodline of the Bruja, it is worth discussing how the Bruja got to Africa in the first place. As with all origin stories, one must start at the beginning, which has us talk about the little we know regarding the antediluvian once more. We know that she was embraced within the walls of the first city by either Irad or Enoch, an individual most commonly known as Bruja. Some refer to her as Ilis, other as Troil, who I already mentioned was her childer. Many scholars confuse the two as the same Canaanite, which is interesting for it is both wrong and correct. You see, Troil and Bruja are not the same Canaanite, but both are the progenitors of the Bruja clan, and by extension the Ossebo. You see, Bruja had the reputation of being cold and passionless, a complete contrast to how I usually describe the Bruja. She had no interest in human needs and the squabbles of the kind that she fed upon. She was a callous and fiercely logical kindred, siring a clan of equally dispassionate chowder. Eventually, she would embrace a man called Troil. In comparison to his sire, he was hot-headed, filled with a fierce passion. It may seem odd to you that Bruja would embrace somebody a total opposite to herself, but you know what they say, opposites attract. Yes, the antediluvian succumbed to the pettiest of all mortal emotions, love. She wanted to taste his emotion, which I mean rather literally, not as some dirty innuendo. And whilst their relationship was a remarkably passionate one, I have no doubt, their love story would end in tears, for Troil the Rebel would diabolise his sire, sometime after the fall of the Second City. No one is certain as to why this happened, a result of a bitter argument perhaps? Some would say that the hatred between the Ventrue and Bruja date back to this one moment, whilst others state that Bruja is actually still alive, escaping Troil with her unique discipline, Temporis, a frightening gift that allows the user to manipulate and warp time around them. It is a discipline that the Bruja no longer possess, but the bloodline, the true Bruja use, but we have already talked about this in great detail already. With the antediluvian presumably eaten by Troil, gone was the large chunk of the emotionless Bruja who monitored the world from the shadows, and born were a clan of rebels and thinkers, a clan who fought to change the status quo of their society. And thus were born Prometheans as we know them today, be it in a raw and unrefined state, many of which are still a great thinker, mind you. The earliest of Bruja would play large roles in the conquering and development of Mesopotamia and Athens, but more so in Carthage, the jewel of the Phoenician Empire. As we have already talked in great details about the rise and fall of Carthage kindred, I'm not going to go over it with you again, but if you wish to remind yourself of what happened, do revisit your notes about the Bruja, the true Bruja, and the Ventrue. From this, it is fair to assume that many Brujah in the continent of Africa assumed the name of Ossebo, presuming that the Ossebo were not there previously. It would not surprise me if the former was true, for it would describe why the Ossebo are one of the larger legacies found on the continent. They are also the most disorganized legacy, providing the Guruhi allow them to be. The common excuse is that they are passionate Liabon, embracing as and when the urge takes them, which would mean it is very difficult to generalize them. This is true, but what is the same with all Ossebo is the fact that they all share the same rage that burns wildly in their chest, much more violently than the Brujah they are descended from, as I previously said to you. The Ossebo and Brujah share two of the three disciplines, which are celerity and potence. Whereas the Brujah has presence to entice a crowd into action, the Ossebo have auspex, allowing them to attune themselves to their environment and heighten their senses, allowing them to stay one step ahead of their prey, to better aid themselves as guards and scouts. That being said, Liabon Auspex is somewhat different from Western Auspex. Whereas Western Auspex progressively increases one's senses from physical to psychic, Liabon gradually imparts a connection to ghostly realms, which you and I would refer to as the Shroud. In short, this breed of Auspex is a combination of Western Auspex and certain necromantic paths, as those who wield this discipline can see ghosts and either enter the Shroud with or without their mortal frame. But why is Liabon Auspex so different compared to how you and I would understand it? Well, some have suggested that this is because the barrier between the Skinlands and the Shadowlands is thinner in Africa, whilst others would have you believe that it is because the Liabon are just that much closer to death than other vampires. What you choose to believe, however, is entirely down to you. But whatever the mindset, the connection with the dead, spirits and ancestors takes up a large chunk of Liabon society, so they usually enact this discipline with a ritual or a prayer, depending on their religious alignment. To do so otherwise would be highly offensive. But returning back to the Ossebo proper now, all kindred have a nickname or two that we adopt from time to time. Calling a Toreador a diva or a gangrel an animal was always a pleasant icebreaker at Elysium, but the Ossebo do not have a name to assign a singular Ossebo, but a collective word, the Pride, which makes them sound pretty animalistic. With what I have told you, it would be fair to assume just that, but there is more to add that confirms this, well, to me at least. Whilst they have next to no organisation for themselves, they can adopt the practices of those who present themselves as a good patron. Ossebo who know each other may even treat each other with respect or maybe even just positively, providing their motives don't conflict with said mentor's preferences, which does often come down to who to kill and not to kill. It is, as I said, animalistic. But this is a legacy who collectively call themselves after a group of lions, the most feared of all hunters in Africa. It is a reputation they have built up over time, as they arrived in the Ebony Kingdom at the same time as the Guruhi. Some would argue that they were there before the Guruhi, but the Keens were the ones who had the idea of ruling over the Ossebo, for the Guruhi have always been better equipped at ruling than any other legacy. Most Ossebo would simply shrug at the idea, for they do not care about such things or worry about how to interpret the tenets and domains. Those who are organised enough to actually do something without an Ossebo mentor build secret criminal organisations and societies, hiding within religious cults, supporting dictators, their rival revolutionaries, or both. Left unchecked, these behaviours can descend into far more hard-hitting savage ruthlessness. Child snatching, kidnapping, blood rituals, black magic, and worse are not uncommon practices amongst such rampant Ossebo. Naturally, the other legacies try and discourage these behaviours for the most part, for they are their most useful to the Guruhi when they are not mindless savages. Because of their might on the front line, as it were, they are able to get on with most other legacies. And that is the ultimate defining factor of the Ossebo when immediately comparing them to that of the Brujah. Both are inherently angry, volatile even, but the Ossebo know they have to attach themselves to other Liabon, to rein in their tempers and outbursts, having others point them in the right direction to cause maximum impact. They have the strength in numbers to overthrow the Guruhi and their rivals, the Zidundu if they wanted to, but they just ultimately don't care for the politics. They know their place, accepting they are meant to fight and tear things apart, leaving the chess game that is the jihad to those above them to move them about. But of course you know that the rage and need to fight is also their biggest weakness, for it will force them to do monstrous things. Missing children, decapitated husbands, and sacrificial wives will be the least of your worries if you catch an Ossebo on an off day. enemy. Such inhumane acts quickly cause them to descend into pure savagery, distancing themselves from their eye, their connection to their earth, and their humane selves, which would cause them to eventually succumb to the might of the beast. And with the Second Inquisition knocking on the front doors of every domain, you have to ask yourself, will the other legacies protect the Ossebo as they always have done, or will they just allow the hunters to become the hunted, feeding the Ossebo right into the lion's merciless jaw? To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.